Welcome to this week's episode of Stranger Stitches. Y'all settle in with your sweet tea and your yarn because today we are diving head first down a rabbit hole into a case that will make your skin crawl and break your heart all at the same damn time. This is the story of David Edward Maust, often referred to as Crazy Dave. That's a name that could have been used as a warning label. David left in his wake a decades-long tale of tragedy and death that could have been prevented. Let's begin at the very beginning, and I'll tell you how all this came about. David Edward Maust was born April 5th, 1954 in Connellsville, Pennsylvania. So he's an Aries, and maybe the stars were trying to tell us something. Aries folks can be very passionate. They're good leaders. But flip that little Aries pancake over, and what you get is an emotional tornado and twice the destruction. In Dave's case, that destructive part was going to prove to be prophetic. But before we get into all the blood and concrete, and trust me, there's going to be plenty of both, let's understand where this nightmare began. David Edward Maust didn't just wake up one day, crawl from under his rock, and be a full-fledged monster. He was manufactured and probably had a good bit in his DNA for that foundation. He was assembled piece by broken piece, starting from the day he took his first breath. His daddy, George Maust, was orphaned at the age of 12 and raised in the 1940s foster system. Back in the day, sometimes being taken into foster care meant that you were sent to the country to a family that needed an extra farmhand. So I'm not sure that our George had it in his toolbox to have a good example of what a father ought to look like. So when David was just 7 years old, Daddy Dearest packed his bags and walked out the door, leaving behind a divorce decree and a little boy who was about to learn about abandonment. And that wasn't just his first lesson, it became an entire curriculum. And his mama, Eva, mercy damn, his mother, Eva, was the neighborhood lady of unsound mind, and she had demons of her own. His mother was described by a social worker as disturbed, psychotic, marginally functional, needy, and narcissistic. She had spent a month or so in a mental hospital in Pennsylvania. So we're talking about documented psychosis here, folks. The woman was struggling with mental illness so severe, it cast an aura over everything in that house, including the children. And instead of getting the help she needed, she got abandoned. And she did what a lot of broken people do. They broke the people closest to them. When David was just 9 years old, y'all, his own mother had him committed to a mental institution. She said her boy seemed born with a need to hurt people. Said he set fire to his brother's bed and tried to drown that brother in the Humboldt Park Lagoon, holding him underwater like he was baptizing him. It doesn't sound like little brother was the one who needed the come to Jesus moment. Jeffrey Maust, that's the brother, confirms that his brother had tried to kill him several times over the years. They also have 2 sisters, but we don't hear too much from them, so I'm going to leave them to their privacy. Social workers added that some of the kids at this institution weren't there due to their own mental or emotional conditions, but because a caregiver was either mentally or physically ill and couldn't take care of them. So a kid goes in with no issues and comes out with more issues than National Geographic. So what impression can that give me about a kid who went in with issues? But this gets really twisted. The social workers didn't believe Eva's story. They saw her for what she was, emotionally disturbed, described as needy as a newborn, and narcissistic enough to make everything about her own pain. They figured that David's admission to the institution wasn't about protecting society from a dangerous child. It was about a mentally ill mother dumping a kid she couldn't handle. It was supposed that David became his mother's punching bag, because he was the spitting image of his father. He reminded her too much of the man who had left her to deal with the kids. In fact, Maust did have a history of violence, having choked but not killed two friends for absolutely no reason. His brother remembered Maust beat a squirrel to death one day in the park with a baseball bat. For what reason? He said, just for fun. Eva and George's divorce became final in 1963, and Mom took David to stay with his father, the same man who'd walked out and abandoned them. George spent 24 hours with David and sent him back like the very next day, like he was returning some broken gadget. That's when Eva said the words that would haunt David forever. She says, and I quote, "I'm going to get rid of you one way or another, so you might as well run away." Mother of the Year, right? Oh, she had used that runaway part as part of the excuse to get him locked up. Years later, she would admit to the police that David never did actually run away. She said, "I was hoping that he would, but he never did." Can you imagine that? A mother hoping her child would just disappear? What the hospital staff had to say at this mental institution, they saw a different kid than the one Eva had described. They didn't see the destructive monster she claimed to have birthed. What they saw was a lonely, damaged little boy whose biggest crime was having parents that didn't want him. But I'm going to tell you, there is no reason to pick sides at this point. David probably had within him the manipulative ability, even at that young age, to present himself the way he wanted to. Later, David himself remembered that place as a child's paradise. Said all he did was play all day. But that means that if he played all day, he wasn't receiving an education and they weren't like doing a lot of therapy. But listen to what else he said, and this gonna break your heart. "I had no social skill, no education, no nothing. I left the mental hospital when I was 13. I was damaged then. I shouldn't have been allowed to leave the mental hospital. I shouldn't have been there in the first place. Being lonely is what destroyed me." End quote. He would stand at the window during visiting hours, waiting for visits from his mother, which were growing very rare over time. The staff noted, "It's pitiful to see the ways in which he is always trying to reassure the staff and himself, excusing his mother to the staff and explaining, 'She's ill. Her back is bothering her,' the report states." So yeah, making excuses for a mom that left him there. That part where he said being lonely destroyed him. Oh, Lord Almighty, if that ain't the saddest truth you've ever heard. David's brother, the one that he tried to drown, revealed that David had been sexually abused during early childhood. I couldn't find any further information other than that one source that said it, and David himself never spoke about it. So I can't tell you with certainty that it actually happened, but in my own heart and mind, I'm not doubting it. Oh, even in that children's home, he got moved over to the children's home when he was 13, and David himself would say that he did suffer more of a sexual assault. This kid couldn't catch a break if his life depended on it, and we will see that it eventually did. And oh my word, he endured lots of advances from other boys, and sometimes he was not successful at fending them off. In 1967, despite his mother's promise that he could live at home with the family, including his new stepfather, Maust went to live at the children's home. He was transferred back to Chicago State Hospital in 1970, but he ran away and never returned to that facility. So here's what he did. He ran away, went to a Cubs game, and then went to his mother's house, where she threatened him with a knife and said that she just didn't want him in her house. She later did apologize and then shipped him off to live with his uncle in Georgia. In 1971, at 18 years old, David did what many desperate people did at the time and have done for generations. He enlisted in the Army. Basic training at Fort Lewis, advanced training at Fort Ord, and then off to Frankfurt, Germany, where he served as a cook. For a while there, it seemed like the military life might be good for him and providing some structure and purpose that David hadn't experienced before. But that structure came crashing down in 1974 when David killed a 13-year-old boy named James McClister. He was the son of American expatriates living in Germany. David claimed that it was an accident involving a stolen moped. That much is true. He did steal the moped in order to take the boy for a ride, and there was a little accident. But Jamie McClister didn't die in the accident. David had taken him on a ride to an out-of-the-way place, tied him to a tree, beat him to death, and then hid the body. But the story that David gave the Army was that after the accident, he had panicked because Jamie had died and he didn't know what to do. Obviously, calling an ambulance or trying to get him help was out of the question. I don't know. But he says that Jamie was killed in the accident and he hid the body in a panic and then never told anyone. But the Army believed the lie and still sentenced him to 4 years at Fort Leavenworth. And here's something that should have been a red flag big enough to cover Texas. He asked not to be paroled. He begged them to keep him locked up. But did somebody listen? No. And it's not that they weren't really listening, it's because they couldn't keep him. After he'd served his sentence, he had to go, despite his wishes. The people there thought I was crazy because I wanted to stay. But I didn't think I was crazy. I was happy there. I was not hurting anyone. I was scared to go back to the real world. I cried so much that all I wanted to do was stay there, Maust wrote in a diary entry. On May 10th, 1977, the Army released him, put him on a plane to O'Hare International Airport, and Maust lived in Chicago until 1981. Then he relocated to Texas. For a brief moment, just a skinny minute, it looked like Dave might find his footing, might be getting his act together. His uncle gave him work on a construction site down in Wrightsville, Georgia. Skilled work, steady pay, something resembling stability. But like everything else in David's life, that did not last. He wrecked a company truck and got himself fired. Then made the mistake of trying to reconcile with his mother. His mother again threatened him with a knife, making it crystal clear that her feelings had not changed one bit. In 1981, Maust had also decided to find and kill the man who had molested him at the children's home when they were both juveniles. He was unable to find that boy, but encountered a 15-year-old Donald Jones and decided to kill him instead. Jones was eventually drowned in an Elgin quarry in Texas. This same year, Maust stabbed a 14-year-old boy, was arrested and sentenced to 5 years for causing bodily harm to a child. When I got locked up in the Army, and especially when I got locked up in 1981, I knew I should never be let out again. I didn't know how to act around other people, and I was never taught how to make or keep friends. When an inmate says he doesn't want out, I hope going forward somebody listens. That was David Maust diary notes from October 30th, 2005. Oh dear, yeah. He knew he was trouble and he was trying to tell him. So life goes on, and David was living in an apartment where he stabbed a friend while the man was sleeping. He was tried for attempted murder, but David lied on the witness stand and admitted as much in his diary and was found not guilty. So I don't get that. There were only two people in the apartment at the time, David and the victim. So what lie could he have told that would have gotten him off the hook? Yeah, I didn't find out anything about that. Even in the court documents and the transcriptions, it didn't give too many details. It just says, gave statement. In 1982, while in jail in Texas, Maust was extradited to Illinois for the Jones murder. A Cook County Sheriff's police officer wrote on a cover sheet of the extradition papers that he sent to Texas, quote, "Bad guy, Gacy type," end quote. Originally found unfit to stand trial, he was held in mental health facilities. Ultimately, after those hospitalizations and roughly 10 years in jail awaiting trial, Maust pled guilty in 1994 and was sentenced to 35 years. However, he received credit for the 12 years he was held and time off for good behavior. So he served 17 years altogether and was released again in 1999. A fact sheet was sent to the Illinois Department of Corrections by the Cook County State's Attorney, and it said this inmate is the most likely and the most dangerous inmate you will ever house. The prosecutor urged that Maust be kept incarcerated, but under the law, Maust was eligible for early release. Maust himself wrote a 5-page letter to the Illinois Department of Corrections requesting not to be released from prison. But he did not meet the criteria to be placed in any other kind of facility, said Dee Dee Short. She's a spokesperson for the Department of Corrections. A little time goes on, and Maust hit an acquaintance 6 times in the back of the head with a metal pipe in another attempted murder. But he was not prosecuted because the acquaintance, although reported it to the police, did not want to pursue prosecution. Michael Dennis and James Regani were last seen near the home where Maust lived in this northwestern Indiana city. The two teens were friends and had visited Maust in the past in his second-floor apartment. A friend later told the detectives. Well, December 2003 rolls around and David is arrested for the strangling death of 16-year-old James Regani. The police searched David's basement in Hammond, Indiana, and they found that boy's body encased in concrete like some sort of homemade tomb. But James Regani wasn't down there alone. Jesus, no. When police started breaking through that basement floor, they found Michael Dennis, who was just 13 years old, Nick James, who was just 19. All 3 of these boys wrapped in plastic, then encased in concrete, like David was making his own little graveyard down there. And this was in the basement of an apartment building, so I don't know how he got away with that. Surely all that digging and mixing had to cause some suspicious noise. But I can give you a better description of what the investigators walked into, because this is where the story gets dark as a new moon. We're talking about deliberate, methodical processes. This wasn't some crime of passion. It was premeditated down to the burial. David had to plan that shit out. He had to buy the concrete, and according to estimates, it was approximately 80 bags. So He bought 80 bags of concrete. Did he buy it all at once? How did he get it home? Maybe he drove a truck. I don't know. He had to be seen, somebody had to seen something moving 80 bags of concrete into the basement. He bought all that plastic sheeting, the rope, the tape. He had to mix the concrete, pour it, let it sit. We're talking about 12-inch thick, solid concrete over these boys' bodies. And that's not something that you can do in a hurry. That's something you do when you're planning to never get caught. The police had to use some industrial equipment to break through. These 12-inch slabs don't crack easy, so what they had to do was drill some holes first and then bring in jackhammers, and it took them days. Both Regani and Dennis had been reported missing about 3 months earlier. That's 3 months that the family spent not knowing where the kids were, 3 months of putting up flyers, calling friends, checking hospitals, praying for some sign that their boys were okay. Meanwhile, the boys were already dead and buried right under everyone's nose in a killer's basement. When the Northwest Indiana authorities went hunting for these victims of serial killer David Maust, a visual search of this basement didn't turn up anything. So they brought in a cadaver-sniffing dog that showed kind of some interest in a corner of the basement, but didn't make a definitive hit. Well, what I learned was that this dog was to sniff around, and when she found something, she was to make a digging motion, and that was the sign for hit, that she had found something. But instead, she didn't do that digging motion. What she did was go in that corner, sniff, 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 sniffing around, and then lay down. And then she'd do it several times. She's trying to give these boys a clue, these policemen trying to give them a clue. Okay, it's not a definite hit, but there is something here. So they took her outside, let her walk around, let her sniff around something else, took her back downstairs, same thing. Same thing. This little girl, this little dog, was trying to tell them what they needed to know, and they weren't listening. So, a guilty plea to all three, and I'm wondering if he could have been connected to any others. Maust's defense attorney, Thomas Vaines, said his client never wanted to leave jail again and was at peace with spending the rest of his life behind bars without the possibility of parole. In the agreement with the prosecutors, Vaines said Maust asked that he be held in isolation in the Lake County Jail before his formal sentencing in the next month, and that his isolation continue after he moved to a state prison. The lawyer said Maust feared for his life. Mumbling single-word answers in a courtroom packed with the family of 2 of the slain boys, Maust showed no emotion as Superior Court Judge Clarence Murray asked if he understood the implications of his guilty plea. As Murray formally read the names of the victims, Nicholas James, James Regani, and Michael Dennis, sobs from the family members filled the courtroom. "Are you pleading guilty to these charges because you are indeed guilty?" Murray asked. "Yes, sir," Maust said, and refused to say anything more. This provides a clean ending for everyone, a final ending. There's no hallmark moments, as Your Honor is aware, but this is about as close as we can get to that, Vaines said. The lead prosecutor in the case, Peter Villarreal, said the families of the 3 victims had given their blessing to the plea deal. Had Maust been tried, convicted, and sentenced to death, the families might not have seen any closure for at least 20 years until all formal appeals had been exhausted. "It's in the best interest of the people of Indiana," Villarreal said of the plea agreement. "It guarantees that he will never walk in society again, and we are trying to protect society." When the victims' family members had a chance to speak about the impact the slayings had on them, most relatives said that they agreed to the plea deal only after they were promised that Maust would never, ever be set free. But one of them, Michael Dennis Sr., added that he did not want Maust placed in isolation. "I don't want him to be in segregation. I want him in general population. He'll get what he's got coming to him," said Dennis. Regani's sister Melody stood with her family outside the prosecutor's office and said, "I wish he understands the grief that he caused. He took my brother away from us. We will never know what he could have become." As part of the plea agreement, Maust spent nearly 6 hours recounting the murders to the Hammond Police Lieutenant Ron Johnson, who led the investigation. Johnson refused to say exactly what they discussed, but did say that the suspect admitted in detail. Why do they keep saying suspect? I'm just going to call him what he is. He's a killer. He admitted and gave details about the murders that he had committed, as well as the Jones killing in Chicago and the McClister slaying in Germany. Christina Harding, McClister's mother, in a telephone interview from her home in Florida, said today all she ever wanted to know from Maust was for him to admit he murdered her son. McClister would have turned 44 years old on the year of his trial. She said her biggest fear was that Maust would get out of jail again. So let me recap just a second. David lured boys to his apartment. These kids who trusted him enough to visit, maybe he was promising them sex, drugs, money, alcohol, or they just thought he was a lonely old man who wanted company, and instead he killed them, turned his basement into their grave, and lived above them. That is something that goes beyond my understanding. But David Edward Maust's story ends differently than what we might have expected. He did not die of old age in jail. David killed himself by hanging in his jail cell. He was 51 years old at the time. Jail workers found a suicide note where he confessed to the 5 killings and apologized to the victims' family. 5 killings, y'all. We may never know how many actual victims there were. A day after he was found hanging from a twisted bedsheet in his jail cell, he passed away. So he did live a little bit after his attempt. He was found hanging in his cell about 10 minutes after the guards told him that he was going to be transferred to the state prison later that day. He did leave a note, and I do have a copy of that note here, but if y'all don't mind, I'm going to let the AI voice read it to you, because honestly, I don't want those words coming out of my mouth.
They were good, nonviolent, innocent young people who did not deserve to die. None of them did nothing wrong. They had nothing I wanted except for them to be my friend, and they took nothing from me. But I still killed them for no reason. The day after the Hammond police came to my home on Friday, September 19th, 2003, I decided to leave for someplace unknown. I wasn't running to keep from being punished, because I always knew I should be destroyed and killed like they sometimes, due to a wild animal that escapes from confinement. For I know how to punish myself, and I only left that day to punish myself for the shameful, evil life I lived, and because of the embarrassment I would cause the people who knew me and allowed me into their homes. But my greatest fear of suffering was for the pain, sorrow, and grief the parents would feel when they learned their loving sons were gone, like their sons wanting to live and enjoy life. I too wanted to live, but I also knew that I deserved to die. And so I left to find a place to commit suicide and drove about 600 miles from Indiana. At the same time, I know I didn't have the right. I wanted to see some more of the beautiful scenery in America before I died, because God did an excellent job in creating the country we live in. And even though I was traveling across America, I knew I had no right to be there or anywhere, so I pretty much stayed to myself and away from other people. Our advertisement, my 5-page letter, had nothing about how I murdered them, for I only wrote about how I was the most evil and horrible person in the world and should be destroyed. Before I left to come to Indiana, I made a deal with myself that I would come back and take responsibility for every evil act I committed in life, including the 3 murders in Indiana. And then, right before the trial, or right after I testified in court, I would do the right thing and kill myself, because I wanted my trial to be for the families, and I didn't want them to wait long for the justice they desired. For if their sons are not alive, then I feel I should not be allowed to live either, and I have always felt that way. My mother has been hoping for my death since I was a child, and it's hard at times to understand why she just didn't drown me in the bathtub when she was giving me a bath, because she hated me all her life. Now a lot of people hate me, and they have the right, because I've done some really bad and evil things in life. P.S. I was hoping to clean the rest of the walls in my cell 2 days before I killed myself, but my back was in too much pain, and so I am very sorry I didn't complete the job.
I'm not saying that David Maust deserves our sympathy. He killed those boys. They deserve to grow up, fall in love, make mistakes, have children of their own. David stole all of that from them and their families. I also don't take away from this that the death penalty would act as any sort of deterrent for other than the one criminal that was put to death. The death penalty has been out there for years and years, and people are still going around killing people. Even if it's carried out swiftly, you caught the one criminal and you stopped them. But do you think that other criminals out there doing the same things are worried about being caught and put to death? I don't think so. Either they think that it will never happen to them, or they don't care. They know that they will be put to death when they're caught, but they're going to continue on with their dirty work until that time happens. And I think it's very probable that there are more victims than we know about. It seems that his cooling off period between killings was about 3 or 4 months, and that leaves some pretty big gaps in his narrative of what they actually caught him for. I really wish that they would go back and look again at some of the other residences and the places that he'd live, and take that sniffing dog with them. I bet they're going to find a few more. I mean, it's too late to do anything to him about it, but maybe the families would like to know. And how do y'all feel if someone had listened to that little 9-year-old boy and been able to act on something towards his betterment or toward keeping him locked up? How about when he was a soldier and he told them, "Do not let me out"? Yeah, lives would have been saved if he had been locked up forever, but the judicial system can't work that way. The system does have its shortcomings, and what we can look forward to is that lawmakers will continue to work towards improvement. So, I'm going to wrap this up. That's it for this episode of Stranger Stitches. Sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones who know exactly what they are and try to warn us. Sometimes the system fails so completely that tragedy becomes inevitable. And sometimes the person who knows best is the last person anybody is going to listen to. Y'all take care of yourselves out there, and remember, when somebody tells you who they are, believe them. Sweet dreams. I'll see y'all next week.